Yeah, no secrets are hid from him. And in essence, when we're being more honest, we're learning things about ourselves that the Lord already knows. Like he's not
Yes.
afraid of our sin and our fear and our anger. He wants us to come more in touch with it so that he can be part of the change process for us.
Yes. And it deepens your relationship with them because it's like a friend when you entrust them with, well, I really don't want to love this child, or I really don't want to change this about myself, or whatever. You get closer to that person because you know them more. I mean,
Yes.
you're more vulnerable with them. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
deepening of a relationship.
Yeah, if you even think about the story of Job, where Job is incredibly honest with the Lord, like essentially, we know what happened. I mean, he lost everything.
Right.
And so his friends come and they see his despair and they sit with him for a week. So he thinks they're good friends.
Right.
And after a week, he pours out his heart and they go from good friends to bad friends because they're saying, Job, you have a horizontal problem. You didn't do this. You should have done that. You could have done this. And Job keeps saying, I've got a vertical problem. Like, I don't know who God is anymore. Until he reminds me who he is, I will have no rest. So for 30 chapters, they have this argument about vertical and horizontal. He keeps saying, I've got a vertical problem. They keep saying it's horizontal. And when God speaks, most people hear God condemning Job because he says, where were you when I formed the foundations of the world? But what we really see is God's answering Job's question because Job kept saying, I will have no rest until God reminds me who he is. And then God also says to Job's friends, if you go and offer Job a sacrifice and he prays for you, I will restore you because you have not spoken rightly about like my servant Job. So if you really think about the Lord listening to Job for 30 chapters and then finally speaking. That's why I think Job was so changed, because the Lord had actually listened to him and heard all his laments. So now what God had to speak really impacted him. And it would be no different with our friends. Too often we want to give them quick advice, which really feels like rejection. So when we wait with them, when we help them lament, when we help them grieve, and then we speak when it's a good time, those words actually penetrate. Those words actually will help people.
Yeah.
How do you know when it's a good time to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I try to keep teaching my students is you're never going to know what you're doing. And you're not supposed to know what you're doing. You really have to learn to wait. This is Romans 12:12. Rejoice in hope, slow down in tribulation, persevere in prayer. Well, hope is not seen. Like as we keep trusting in what we do not see and we keep waiting, I think better and better we can hear the Spirit and move with him. And that's the confidence we want to grow. Not oftentimes we're speaking out of our own stuff, our own selfishness, our own fear, which feels like rejection of people. But as we learn to wait on the Lord and trust him, then we have a better sense of when to speak.
Yeah.
Well, back to kind of the self-awareness, what would you say to somebody who is just wants to say it's okay and I don't want to deal with my feelings, I don't want to sit in that? What are you, I mean, I know you counsel people to do that. What is your kind of first step of saying like, hey, it's okay to not be okay, but then how do you tell someone to sit in it? What are your suggestions to even get started on that path?
Yeah, well, that actually, what you said is a good first step to kind of meet them there, first of all, and to be like, why would you want to pray? And oftentimes, and I'm not saying this directly, what we don't see, like what's getting in the way between us and the Lord is our fleshly or sinful nature, which is full of fear and doubt. And so oftentimes that's pushing us away from the Lord. So when we give people permission to be there, then we're actually helping them stand up to their fleshly nature. Like as we wait with them, we help them sorrow, we help them grieve. You shouldn't want to do this.
Yeah, that's true.
In terms of growing self-awareness, I don't know that there's a great place to start instead of other than what I've already said in terms of trying to wait with them and believing that, like, if we really believe for people that they do want to do what's good and right and that we can't make them get there, oftentimes as we wait with them, our presence is what helps them change. Our presence is what helps them turn to the Lord. Or, like, if we really believe God is the center of all good, and he's always pursuing us. Like he's always trying to draw us to him. This is an example I often use. an arrogant, self-assured 19 or 20-year-old, and I drive out from Long Island in New York to visit my sister in college in Western Pennsylvania. And I drive out, it's in the fall, 8 hours out, 8 hours back, rolling hills in Pennsylvania, beautiful fall colors. I get back into New York after the weekend. I'm like, what's the big deal with the fall colors? Like, I don't understand why people drive out to Pennsylvania to, spend a weekend looking at the fall colors. Well, about 30 years later, I was a little bit humbler. I'm driving down I-65 from North Alabama, and I look outside, and I'm like, God, you are so kind. You are so kind.
Yeah.
And the heavens declare his glory. So if we really believe God is that big and that kind, and he's pursuing people, I believe they want to surrender themselves to him. I don't have to make them do that. To ask good questions, wait with them. Sometimes there has to be some exposure of how they trust themselves or where they trust themselves. And oftentimes I'm looking at their relationships to kind of help them see some of that.
Yeah.
But I don't know that any of us really wants to judge the log in our own eye first.
Yeah.
Right. It's so
helping
hard.
people go there is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My daughter and I were talking about that because it is so easy to see the speck in somebody else's eye instead of the huge plank that's in our own eye. It's like, and it almost makes you feel good when you're like, let me get that speck out of your eye. And you're like, wait, hold on, you Pharisee. Like, hold tight. But it is. I mean, it's hard to look at your own life. It's hard to reflect on like who we really are in light of who God is. When I compare myself to, my neighbor, it's fine. But when I compare myself to God, I'm not doing so hot,
Yeah. And I don't only believe that it's self-awareness is seeing what's wrong with ourselves. Oftentimes when I'm teaching in the passage in Ephesians where it says, speak the truth in love to one another.
Yes.
And I'll ask the audience what that means. And they'll often say saying hard things to people. So then I'm like, so all that your friends or family do is sin? Like, is that all we're, And I've actually found people have as hard a time hearing what's beautiful and glorious about them.
Yes.
So real self-awareness is celebrating our strengths, seeing them, not being afraid of them.
Yes.
Paul says, I'm a called and gifted apostle. I'm not about to apologize for it. And he says, I'm a chief among all sinners.
Yeah.
So good self-awareness is both. And that's where I think a lot of our self-awareness people is only where you're wrong or off or sinful, or the other way, only where you're good. And leaning into truth is both. It's really, and coming to self-acceptance that I'm just a human being with some really glorious aspects and some really broken aspects.
Yes. In fact, that was one of my favorite lines. I don't know if you've seen The Chosen, but like Mary sins again in The Chosen, and Jesus looks at her and he's like, did you think you would never sin again? It's like, he really wants our communion. He wants to be with us. Like, he knows we're going to fall. I mean, he doesn't judge us. Like, he died for our sins way before we ever said we were sorry for them. He loves us genuinely, not because of like the perfect that we think that he expects us to be.
Yeah, if we were if he died when we were alienated from him, how much more now is he for us that we're friends?
Yes.
I really am glad you said that, because that is such a picture. I feel like I tend to lean towards the way of like, I got to get it together and I need to be aware of what's wrong with me. But it's so easy to forget that like God has so much love for me as well. And that's the sweetness of the truth in that.
It's equally humbling, really, to hear both.
Yeah. And it's like the leaves where you're like, you love me. You made these leaves for me. You, the God of the universe, cares about me. And that's a really great place to even find who God made you to be, to dig into that.